Hello all, in this video I want to do something a little different and talk about design from a woodworker's perspective. The objective being, by sharing some of the principles that have helped me, it might help others find their voice through their work. What I mean by that is, you may very well have a good or high level of skill within the craft and have a well equipped versatile workshop. But beyond the bespoke brief of a client or a replica of benchmark pieces to hone your skills, what do you make? Time and material allowing, there's a world of directions you could go, but how do we go about making our work say something? Not necessarily stand out, like creating the odd wild wow piece, but be generally distinctive, perhaps even recognisably you. Watching a video from Padula Studios recently, a great craftsman and video maker, I was struck by his recollections of a conversation in an interview where he mentioned the ultimate goal is to be able to make what you want when you want. Ah, the holy grail, came the reply. I will admit, making when you want does seem a bit of a luxury, but making what you want? Is that even achievable in this age of everything always? I think it might be, but design needs to be more considered, your pieces all perhaps part of the same story. But before we get into talking more about that, who the hell am I to be talking about design? Well, I'm no one, at least in this context. I have no background in design theory or industrial design. I'm someone who, through a little personal tragedy, tripped and fell on my own design language. So a little about that. Since the age of 14, I was destined to be on the tools, or rather forced by tradition and family ties into it. From boat building to later first fix carpentry due to availability of work, I've tried numerous times to get away from it through unrelated college stints and other courses, yet I kept getting pulled back into the trade somehow. I pretty much reached a point of career acceptance when, while on site, an accident left me broken bodied and with permanent damage to my middle ear, meaning the intensity of site work was now unfortunately out of the question. I designed a boat while I convalesced. I also toyed with the idea of setting up a small workshop in the garage, but beyond the odd bespoke project, refining my knowledge of wood species and creating a physical catalogue of just about every woodworking joint, I didn't know what to make that could potentially have clients come to me rather than me go out and shop for work, which my condition limits. I lost my mum about this time. An intelligent, humble woman, she left no inheritance to speak of, but would leave me with a valuable parting gift. As a graduate of the history of art, she had a wealth of books on art, architecture and design throughout the ages. I'm not without regret that I remember not once discussing this passion of hers with her, yet with her gone, there I was, consuming her library, seemingly inheriting that same passion. Such is the tangled web between artist and artisan through the ages. From the history of art, I found myself familiarised with all sorts, from the ancient Chinese carpenter Lu Ban, to traditional techniques for complex 3D forms in 2D line drawing like Kikujutsu and stereotomy, to Renaissance masterworks that adorn European castles and cathedrals, Filippo Brunelleschi's mastery of artistry and problem solving making an indelible mark. From the stunning design and marquetry of neoclassicist furniture makers William Ince and John Mayhew, contemporaries of Chippendale, and the great carvings of Grinling Gibbons, right through to the Art Nouveau work of Charles René Mackintosh and modernists at the Bauhaus. It would seem I'd opened a Pandora's box, only complicating matters, but the modernists in particular unlocked something for me, and the wider rich history helped me narrow down my field of interest. Before I get into the nuggets I discovered from my reading that helped me, let's have a look at common design by numbers principles. They might actually help, but some I don't think are relevant, at least not always. First, the basic laws of design that seem to appear everywhere, sometimes listed as anything from the 7 to 12 laws, but it's basically 7. They are emphasis, alignment and balance, contrast, repetition, proportion, movement, and white space. Most there are self-explanatory, but for clarity, movement here relates to how someone interacts with your work, the direction their eyes may work or are led around a piece mainly. Could also include creating focal points too. White space is probably best illustrated with pictures, I think. This is an old ghetto blaster. That brings back some fond memories. Pretty busy looking, and the order of the day was clearly to include as many buttons, bells and whistles as possible. This, by contrast, is a portable DAB radio and Bluetooth speaker from Pure. That it happens to be white is of no consequence, but you'll notice it's unfussy. There's separation between the bits that matter. That's white space. In woodworking, the shaker style could be said to employ white space as compared to, say, Rococo, favouring marquetry and adornment. Although meant to be applied to design more generally, with the exception of white space as a hard and fast rule, these aren't actually a bad set of design principles to apply to your woodworking. Another popular set of design principles are the 10 Rules for Design by Dieter Rams of Braun fame. said to have influenced the clean look of Apple products and such. Unlike the broad 7 principles above, the Rams 10 have always read to me much more like a personal mantra, well suited to his work with Braun and others in their products development. Not all applicable for us woodworkers, but perhaps some informative nuggets too, so let's have a quick look. Of course, a lot of woodworking design has a strong artistic element and often draws on history and tradition, so always being innovative doesn't really apply. What we make or design needn't always be useful first and foremost either, although it often has a usefulness by default. By unobtrusive, he's referring to not decorative, not art, and leaving expression to the user. So that would rule out demonstrations of skill and flair by craftsmen and carvers. Nice principle for a smartphone designer, but not really applicable for most woodworkers. In the same vein, number 10's good design is as little design as possible reads as an ode to less is more a la Mies van der Rohe peering through the door of minimalism. If that's your intent, to be minimalist, then fine. But again, this wouldn't generally be a guiding principle for a woodworker. Interestingly, Dieter Rams was a carpenter in his early years. While I think there's much in these lists of design principles that can help you on your way to defining or refining your work, what really helped me find my voice was reading about the Bauhaus. In case you don't know, the Bauhaus was a German art school that operated between 1919 and 1933. It was highly influential then, and still is today really, specifically for its attempts to unify the disciplines of art, design and architecture, and its practical approaches to function and mass production. Art and design for the masses, if you like. It really was trying to jog things along, and we can only wonder, absent the Second World War, what it might have become had it been allowed to continue. I found myself reading about some of the Bauhaus art and design classes and how strict limits were sometimes imposed on material, colours and scope of project as a means to quickly fire up ingenuity and creativity. It sounds counterintuitive, but by limiting what you design or make by restricting material choices, shapes or palettes, I think can really help you focus. It was a big influence on my thinking about what I design and how. As I was searching for more on this concept from the Bauhaus, I stumbled upon a program called Bauhaus Rules presented by Vic Reeves. It's a fun little watch that follows a group of art and design students undertaking projects as they would have at the Bauhaus. The concept of restriction I mentioned is talked about and explored in parts of it. I'll link it in the description below. So how did it apply to me? Well, firstly, I limited what I was going to make to chairs and small tables. Chairs because, in a way, they are perhaps the most personal objects we can make in terms of user interaction. Small tables because they're the most logical accompaniment to chairs. Secondly, I was going to limit the form of what I make. Staying with the Bauhaus, one of its most well-known disciples was Marcel Breuer, most commonly remembered now for his chairs and tables with simple tubular steel frames. The appearance of the tubular steel was that of a continuous loop, even if not technically the case, but I found the aesthetic interesting as it might be applied to wood frames. It would mean that the cantilevers common to his designs are out, but a looping frame concept and where it might lead for a range of chairs had me scribbling in my notepads for about a year straight. Just as a side note, cantilevers are possible in wooden furniture, one of my favourite examples being this rocker by Jeremy Brune. You'll notice the extra material around the joints making this possible. I personally wanted a more consistent look, same dimension all round, like those early tubular steel frames. I came up with a ratio based around pi to govern all my curves on my pieces, so the relationship between the stock size and internal and external radii always remains the same across my pieces. The final piece of the puzzle was the joinery. If it were just a matter of what is ultimately most suitable or practical for the curves, it would be the bridle joint. However, I wanted a touch of my two favourite chair designs sprinkled into my work. The Vladimir Krasnogorov club chair and the Sam Malouf settee/armchair. I just don't tire of looking at these. For me, they're close to perfection if such an abstraction is attainable. I think a lot of their appeal to me is the seamless blending at intersections and invisible joinery. Like the parts are growing out of each other, and wherever you were to run your hand, it would feel smooth with no hard intersections. So invisible joinery and smooth blends where there are intersections I'd also incorporate. So from 5 years in the abyss, ticking over, making just about everything but not knowing what to make of my own design, to within 1 year of reading my way through my mother's library, my style was being born. And it was born from setting myself strict limitations. Designing within strict limitations, or even deciding what those limitations are, is not easy, but I do believe it opens up a wellspring of inspiration that will help you find your voice, your style, your niche, whatever you want to call it. After 4 years' work, I still only have just 2 finalised chair types and 1 table, albeit the latter in a range of sizes. Many more designs in the style sit on the computer and in the notebooks, some even physically prototyped, some still in final development, most will never be made. Even when you set boundaries and restrictions, not every design passes muster, but for some reason the designs keep flowing nonetheless. What restrictions or limitations you would apply would be entirely down to you. It depends wholly on what your tastes, aspirations and inspirations are. Whatever you try, with a little luck, it could end up with the holy grail mentioned at the start, of making what you want, if not always when you want. So my design limitation then is pretty simple. Continuous looping wooden frames, same dimension all round, even through the curves. Hidden joinery and fixings, and that's it, and where it starts. From there, I've developed simple formulas for the curve, ratios, and triangular relations to dial everything in, which could be perceived as a second limitation to keep the designs balanced across the range. For materials, it's hardwood, polished aluminium, and on the chairs, upholstery, nothing else. A good simile might be the popularity of restaurants providing limited menus. Limiting the menu choices allows the chefs to create and perfect a limited number of dishes rather than spread themselves and their skills thin trying to provide 100 average meal options to try and please everyone. Even great chefs can become befuddled trying to provide for everyone's whims. Limit, create and perfect. I think something not mentioned yet, but also worth mentioning, is to look to nature for inspiration. As an example, on my chairs I needed a transition to flow seamlessly between one part stepped out from the other. The inspiration of how to do it, bizarrely, came from this odd looking tree that is on one of my local walks through the woods. The way it seamlessly seems to flow down and offset itself in an attempt to find light. It became a big influence for the offset rear foot for my chairs. So like I said at the beginning, I'm no authority on design, but as always, I hope by sharing what has helped me may help someone else. I find it quite strange that there are so many gifted woodworkers and furniture makers in every corner of the world and online, but whilst we may sometimes discuss a piece and its inspiration, discussion of design philosophy and principles in woodworking just doesn't seem to be a thing. And that's a shame because I think there are many out there with something to say, something to contribute outside of their material work. In every design discipline, history, philosophy, principles, responsibilities and the like are discussed at length. I don't think it's missing in various woodworking disciplines necessarily. Indeed, I do have a few books that talk about just that, but I just think it's more generally lacking, especially in this online space. Perhaps we're all a bit less talk, more dust, no time for bum fluffery. But in this saturated world, could we be boxing ourselves in, pun intended? I'd love to hear your thoughts if you have any on this. Is design in woodcraft not explored or discussed enough? Would you try the limit approach I use to see if it pushes your own design forward? If you feel you've tapped into a distinctive style, what got you there? Do you not have a style but work to a set of principles that guide your work maybe? I'm also interested to hear if any of you think making to a style or having your own design language has no appeal at all. Please comment with any thoughts on this below. If you think this worthy of a wider discussion, feel free to share it with any groups you belong to as well. Before I go, Jeremy Brune, whose rocker I showed you earlier, produced a short documentary in what looks to be, I don't know, maybe the early 90s, called The Chair, Symbol of Culture and Service. It shows its age, being originally on VHS, but if design interests you, it's a fascinating look into the world of various chair and furniture makers. Plenty on show to enthuse and inspire, and with frankly far too few views. I'd also recommend to you a YouTube channel called Design Theory. Not a woodworking channel, but again, if any aspects of design are something that might interest you, broad aspects of it are discussed on that channel. So I'll leave it there, I think. Please like the vid before you go, sub if you aren't already, and as ever, if you made it this far, thanks for watching.